Hi, this is Mrs. Cotter. We're going to be working on week 7, day 2. So we're starting to get into a bit of harder information. So just please follow along as closely as possible. And remember, if you have any questions, you can contact either me, Miss Fifield, or Miss Fisher with questions. All right, so let's look at the first part of this day. It says, this table shows the favorite subject of the third graders at Cayuga Elementary. So the favorite subjects are math, language arts, history, and science. So it has questions down here for us. I'm going to zoom in. It says A is how many students voted for science? Well, we can't look at this table because there's a question mark, but what we can do is we can look at the table here. Right over here it says science. Now, remember, one box equals 2. We can check right here. This would be 0, 1, 2. So each box equals 2. So we got to count by 2s until we get to the 14. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We could either count by 2s or we could have looked across at the table and saw that science stopped at 14. So 14 students voted for science. Now we're going to look at B. It says how many more students voted for math than for science? Write a number sentence to show your thinking. Whenever it says how many more, we know that that's going to be a subtraction problem. So it says how many more students voted for math than for science? Well, let's look at our table. 18 people voted for math and 14 people voted for science. So here's my subtraction problem. Now you need to figure out what 18 minus 14 is. You might need to get a piece of scratch paper to figure it out, or you might know how to do this already. So 8 minus 4 is 4, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So 4 more people voted for math than for science. Now let's look at C. Which gets more votes? Math and ELA together, I'm going to underline that because that's important, or history and science together. So when it says together, we know we're going to add. So let's see. For math, there were 18 people, and I'm looking at this table right here to help me. For math, I know there was 18 people, and for language arts, there was 13 people. So I'm going to do 18 plus 13. Because in our question, it says math and ELA together. And then it says history and science. Well, over here it says that there were 17 people for history, and we figured out for science that there were 14. So which one had more votes? So let's add 18 plus 13 first. 8 plus 3 is what? 11. Put the 1 here, carry the 1 on top. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So for ELA and math, I'm going to write that here. ELA and math got 31 votes. Now let's figure out how much for history and science. I'm going to put an H for history and an S for science, so I know that these are for the history and science votes. So 7 plus 4 is what? 11. Carry the 1. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So math, ELA and math and history and science got the same exact vote. So they got the equal amount. All right, let's move on. All right, so let's look at example number 1. It says place the two fractions on the number line. Circle the fraction with the distance closest to 0, then compare using greater than, less than, or equal than. So let's look at our example. They have 2/3 and 1/3. So what they did is on their number line, they broke it into thirds, starting from 0 to 1. 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. Then they circled the fraction that had the closest distance to 0. Well, if we look at 1/3 and 2/3, 1/3 is closest to 0. And we know that 2/3 is closer to 1. So if we look using our greater than or less than or equal sign, we know that 2/3 is bigger than 1/3 because 1/3 is closer to 0 and 2/3 is closer to 1. Now look at this one. They have 1/2 and 2/4. Now the bottom numbers are different, so they had to do halves and fourths on this number line. So on the top, they did their halves. They did 0/2, 1/2, and 2/2. Then they did on the bottom their fourths, 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. So if we look at what is bigger, greater than, or equal than, if we look at 1/2 and I mark it on the number line here, and I look at 2/4 and I mark it on the number line here, they're at the same place. They're equivalent. So 1/2 and 2/4 equal the same exact thing. Now we're going to try. So it says step 1, partition the number line into fourths and label the points on the bottom. So let's look at our fourths. So 0/4, label it right here. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4, and I'm going to label it. Now it says label it on the bottom, but we don't have much space on the bottom, so I'm going to label it on top. As long as it's labeled, that's all that matters. 3/4 and 4/4. Okay, now let's look at step 2. It says partition the number line into eighths. Think about the relationship between eighths and fourths. Label the points on the top. Okay, so I'm going to do this one in eighths. So I'm going to write 0/8 here. So 0/8, 1/8. This point will be 2/8, 3/8. This point will be 4/8, 5/8. This point will be 6/8, 7/8. And this point will be 8/8. Now the way that I knew that this point will be 2/8 or this point will be 4/8, well, if I look at this one, 1 plus 1 is going to be 2, and 4 plus 4 is 8. Same thing here. 2/4. 2 plus 2 is 4, and 4 plus 4 is 8. Same here. 3 plus 3 is 6, and 4 plus 4 is 8, and 4 plus 4 is 8, and 4 plus 4 is 8. So it works out that these numbers would be equal if I add those numbers on the top and the bottom. Okay? Let's look at number 3. It says the number closer to 0 is a smaller number, using that to compare with the greater than, less than, or equal. So I'm going to circle in blue the fraction that's closer to 0. So 1/8 is the closest one to 0. It's closer than 1/4. Okay? So 1/8 is the closer. So let's look at our fractions. It says 1/4. I'm going to put a dot right there. And 1/8. Well, which dot is closer to 0? 1/8 is closer to 0. So it's smaller than 1/4. 1/4 is bigger because it's closest to the 1. Okay, let's move on. All right, example number 2. It says, to get to the library, John walks 1/3 mile from his house. Susan walks 3/4 mile from her house. Draw a number line to model how far each student walks. Who walks further? Explain how you know using pictures and numbers and words. So let's look at John's example. So John said that he walks 1/3 mile from his house. So what he did is they drew a number line by thirds. We know that because of the bottom number. So we see that from his house, this is how much he walked, right here. This is John's house, and he walks 1/3 mile. But let's look at Susan. She walks 3/4 mile. So let's look at the number line here. Well, Susan's house is right here, and they split their number line into fourths. So she walks this much from her house. Well, we can see that Susan walks a lot more of a distance than John does. So Susan walks the most. And we did that by drawing the number line. We drew John's number line in thirds because he said that he walked 1/3 mile from his house. And Susan said that she walked 3/4. So we did it in fourths. We did the number line in fourths. But we can look, if I compared it like this, well, we can see that Susan walks a lot more than John does. All right, now it's our turn to try it. It says, in a long jump competition, Wendy jumps 9/10 meters and Judy jumped 10/9 meters. Let's underline that. Draw a number line to model the distance of each girl's long jump. Who jumped the shorter distance? Explain how you know using pictures, numbers, and words. So I'm going to look at Wendy's jump first. So she said that she jumped 9/10 meters. So I'm going to mark with a dot 9/10. Well, I drew my number line and I did it all the way to 2. And to just to make sure, okay? And I labeled the 0, the 1, and the 2. So let's look for 9/10. So 0/10, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10. I'm going to mark that with a red dot. Okay? So I found Wendy's. I'm going to put a W for Wendy. Now, Judy says that she jumps 10/9 meters. Well, part of the reason why I did it to 2 is because 10/9 meters is bigger than 9/9. So I had to go past 2. So let's find Judy's. I'm going to put a J for Judy. So I'm going to look for 10/9 now. Well, I'm not going to count each one. I'm going to go to starting from 9/9. So 9/9, 10/9. So who jumped the shorter distance? It's asking for the shorter distance. Which one is closest to 0? Well, if I look at this number line, Wendy jumped a shorter distance because look, Judy is closest to 1. Even if I marked it up here like that, we can see that Wendy jumped a shorter distance. So Wendy jumped a shorter distance because 9/10 is closest to 0. All right, let's move on. Okay, so this problem set says, place the two fractions on the number line. Circle the fraction with the distance closest to 0, then compare using the greater than, the less than, or the equal sign. So in our examples before, we had talked about this. So we're going to now label the number lines instead of it doing it for us. So the first one says 2, 6, and 3, 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up into 6 and label it. So 0, 6, 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 6, 4, 6, 5, 6, and 6, 6. Now, if you like, you can label each one on top of it. I'm not going to label it because I can just count. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a circle at 2, 6. So 0, 6, 1, 6, 2, 6. I'm going to put a little red dot, and just on top of it, I'm going to put 2, 6. Now I'm going to look for 3, 6. So 0, 6, 1, 6, 2, 6, and 3, 6. Now it says circle the fraction that's closest to 0. So if I look here at 2, 6, and 3, 6, I see that 2, 6 is closest to that 0. So I know that this fraction, 2, 6, is going to be smaller than 3, 6. So 2, 6 is less than 3, 6 because 2, 6 is closest to 0. 3, 6 is closer to 1. 0 is less than 1, so 2, 6 is going to be smaller. All right, let's look at number 2. So now this time we have to put two different fractions on the number line. So we have to put halves and we also have to put fourths. So I'm going to do the halves first. So 0 halves, and I'm going to write the halves on top. So 0 halves, 1 half, and 2 halves. Now it's important that you write the fractions and actually label the fractions this time compared to this one, because we have halves and we have fourths and it can be confusing. So now I'm going to do the fourths. So at the bottom I'm going to write 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. Now remember, I told you guys this in the other one. The reason that I know that 2/4 would be under this line is because if I look at the halves, 1 plus 1 is 2, and at the bottom 2 plus 2 is 4. So these are equivalent. Same thing with this. 2 plus 2 is 4 right here, and 2 plus 2 is 4 right here. Those are equivalent fractions. All right, so now I'm going to circle the fraction that's closest to 0. So if I look here, 1/4 is the closest one to 0. So I know that's the closest. Now I'm going to make a dot. So we have 1/2. So I'm going to put my dot right here. And we have 1/4 right here. Well, we see that 1/4 is closest to 0. And 1/2 is closer to 1. So 1/4 is smaller than 1/2. And we can see that here because if we look here, it's closer to the 0. All right, let's go on to the next one. So we have 2/3 and 2/6. So we need to break up our number line into thirds and 6. So let's do 2/3 first. So 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3, right under that 1. Now, I just want to remind you before I move on, make sure that when you're making your number line that you're trying to make the sections as equal as possible. You don't want to jumble it up close. All right, so we did our thirds. Now, let's go on and do our 6. So 0/6, I'm going to write that on the bottom. 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6. Again, I knew that 2/6 and 1/3 are equivalent because 1 plus 1 equals 2, 3 plus 3 equals 6. Again, 2/3 and 4/6 are equivalent because 2 plus 2 is 4, and 3 plus 3 is 6. So I know those are equivalent. All right, so now let's circle the one that's closest to 0. Well, I'm looking which one is closest to 0, and I see that 1/6 is the closest one to 0. Now I'm going to label 2/3. Where's 2/3? Okay, right here. So I'm going to put a dot right there. And 2/6, where's 2/6? Right here. So which one is closest to 0? Is it 2/3 or is it 2/6? 2/6 is closest to 0, so it is smaller than 2/3. All right. Okay, let's move on. All right, it says, Mr. Brady, I'm going to bring this down. Mr. Brady draws a fraction on the board. Ken says it's 2/3 and Dan says it's 3/2. Do both of these fractions mean the same thing? If not, which fraction is larger? Draw a number line to model 2/3 and 3/2. Use words, pictures, and numbers to explain your comparison. So this is very similar to when we compared Judy and Wendy's a long jump. So what I did is I looked at Ken's first. And he said that his was 2/3. So what I did is I drew a number line from 0 to 2, 0, 1, and 2. And I labeled my endpoints 0/3, 3/3, 6/3, my whole numbers. Now I'm going to put a dot at 2/3. Because that's what Ken says. So 0/3, 1/3, 2/3. So right here is 2/3. And Dan says, no, it's 3/2. So I drew Ken's number line all the way with my endpoint of 2. I labeled my whole numbers, 0/2, 2/2, and 4/2. And now I'm going to label where 3/2 is. So 0/2, 1/2, 2/2, 3/2. This is where 3/2 is. So it says that they mean the same thing. Do both of these mean the same thing? If you look at our number lines, they're the same size. 2/3 looks like it's a lot smaller than where 3/2 is. So even if I go like this and I measure it, 3/2 is a lot bigger and it's closer to 2 than 2/3 is. So they do not mean the same thing. 2/3 is less than 3/2. 3/2 is a lot bigger than 2/3 because 2/3 is closer to 0 than 3/2 is. If you look at the 3/2, it's almost at that 2. 2/3 is not. It's closer to 0. It hasn't even hit that 1 yet. So 2/3 is smaller than 3/2. They do not mean the same thing. 3/2 is larger. Okay, and that's all for week 7, day 2. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to reach out to me, Miss Fifield or Miss Fisher. Also, packets 8 and 9, those are the last packets for the end of the year. They are outside of Tubman in the boxes, so you can go and pick those up now. I believe they will be out there from 8 to 2 o'clock p.m. So make sure that you do that. Also, please make sure that you are going on Zearn. If you want more math work or more practice, Zearn is a great way to get your practice in. All right, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.